Oh, hey YouTube. Today we're going to do the famous AR3A. And there's a big part of the problem right there. I don't know if you can hear this, but you hear that crunchiness? That's corrosion and oxidation. These have to come out. I don't know if you can get a good look at this. This is what they look like on the inside. And this one, you know, we tried to clean it up with a wire brush and some deoxit, but it's just too far gone. The base metal is eaten into. So 20 years ago we'd have pulled these pots out and took them apart and cleaned them up, put deoxit in there, and we put it back together. It'd work fine. But now these things are, well, this is late 60s. This is 67 to 69 probably, this variant. So these pots are gone. They're what, 50 years old. They're so corroded they have to be replaced with a more modern style pot. Something like that. Alright, let's take a look at the front. I want to show you something here. Alright, these grill frames are real thin and real delicate. And what you see is people will try to get in here with a screwdriver, and they'll try to pry that, and they'll booger up the face of the cabinet and or damage the grill frame. So this is what and this is, the badge is missing too. There's normally a badge here. That's what that hole is. And when you have the badge there, you can turn it, and you can make this hole under there so that when you turn it back, the hole's covered up. But we don't have a badge anyway, so I'm going to do it right in the corner. I'll take a self-tapping Phillips screw, and I've already run it in here with my screw gun, so the hole's already there, and I've had it off. I just want to show you. So I put that in there like that, and then use a claw hammer here. You could use a big pair of pliers or channel locks, and you run it in far enough to where you're through the thickness of this, but obviously you don't want to screw that end to where it's screwed into the wood. You're not going to come out. And then you get on here like this, you lift that thing up, and you get it just enough to get your putty knife. And you need a real thin putty knife here, because what you're going to do is not just pry and lift on this, but you're going to scrape or cut into that glue bead that's under there. Alright, so once I get that lifted up without breaking it, and I get it lifted up high enough, then I can get that corner up, and I can put a screwdriver in it, and then I can start working my way down with the putty knife. Same way here. When I get the end done, I'll start working down through here with the putty knife. Alright, let's see what we're looking at, what they've done here, which is not really a very impressive piece of engineering. Look at here. It's kind of a, well, I'm not even sure what type of glue it is, but obviously they weren't meant to, you know, they weren't trying to glue it on permanently, but there's a lot of glue here, you see. And every one of those, you see where it's got cloth on it, where I had to get up in here with my putty knife and get through there. Otherwise I'd have broke the frame and or tore up the cloth. Now look how thin this frame material is. This is very easy to break when you go prying on it, especially the top and the bottom. Look at that. See, I've already cracked that getting it off there. But for the most part, it's intact and the cloth is intact, so I can reuse this, and that's what you want to do. You can get this type of linen, and you could put it on. This is, unless you're experienced putting this kind of cloth on, this is hard to do. It doesn't stretch like the modern polyesters. You have to have an iron, you have to have some starch. This is pretty difficult stuff to work with. And stapling into this hard meatite, that's not an easy thing to do either. So, you know, that's not the best part of an AR3A. Alright, now let's look inside here. Here's what we're going to do. We've got one capacitor here, and look at this thing. We've got two capacitors here. Now look at that big gnarly Frankenstein looking capacitor. That's awesome, isn't it? But there again, this thing is what, 50 plus years old, and it's gone bad. So you see the pots here on this side now. You see the pots there. Now we're gonna change those out. Those three inductors there, they're good. They're gonna stay. Well, here's another thing to take a note of. This is pretty interesting. if you see a schematic of this circuit, you'll see a 1/2 ohm resistor here. And you look in here and you don't see a 1/2 ohm resistor. Well, here's what it's doing, the 1/2 ohm of resistance. That little piece of wire. So they're not using a wire wound resistor. That little, because of the gauge of that wire and the length, that's a 1/2 ohm of resistance. And so that's the resistor you see on the schematic. Unusual. Alright, let's make note of another thing now. Alright, this capacitor here is supposed to be 6 microfarad. Let's see where it's at nowadays. Alright, it's a little over 8 microfarad. ESR is still reasonable. It's supposed to be a 6 and it's 8.5, so that's what, 30-some%. It's over 30% out of tolerance. In a crossover like this, you don't want the caps to be 10% out of tolerance. That's about as much as you want to have. And if you're building a set of speakers, check the caps and match them so that you have the same tonal balance on both speakers. Now, this dual cap here, you have a 50 and a 150. Now, the 50 in this case measures just a little over 50. Let's look at it again here. Alright, get that on there. Oh, see, okay, I gotta find a ground. Alright, so the section here that's supposed to be 50 is, you see, in circuit or leaky. And this cap is not in the circuit, so that means it's a leaky cap, it's bad. The other side, that's supposed to be 150. Alright, this is the side that's supposed to be 50. Okay, so we're a little over 52 and still an acceptable ESR. So the 50 side, you know, it's got to be replaced, but it's still showing close to what it was supposed to be. Now, the 150 side, which I had before, that's the one that showed leaky. So in any event, we're going to take that, we're going to change that cap, no matter what the meter says, because it's old. But when I first checked the 150 microfarad section, it didn't show leaky. It showed 350 microfarad. So that's how far out the value that cap was before it actually failed. Alright, we'll change these caps out and then and these pots and get that wired up, and then we'll show you what that looks like. Okay, there's something else here about the AR, which I should have started off with this, but these pots on this one are so corroded that we're getting no output out of the mid and no output out of the high. So because I listened to it and I've got no output there, then that makes me wonder if these devices even work at all. So you see, these are painted black and the wires attach on this end. You don't want to scrape it up here where the wires are, because you could damage that connection. So come down here where it's riveted on and scrape the paint off here. Once you get the paint scraped off, common's in the middle. So here's your mid-range, 3.2 ohm, 3.1, and here's your tweeter. About the same, 3.2, 3.1. Alright, so at least we know we've got continuity, we've got good voice coils here. After we change out those pots, we'll find out if we've actually got any sound. Alright, we've got these ARs about ready to where we can change the pots and replace the capacitors. I want to show you a little, for you guys who are just getting into the whole speaker thing, I want to show you a little bit about how crossovers work. So let's start here. We're going to use this Infinity 12-inch woofer as a little test base here. Alright, that's set at about 7 cycles or so, close to 8 maybe. Now, we're running this straight on the generator here, And anybody who's going to be serious about doing speaker work should get themselves a tone generator. I know about all these people that say I use apps on my phone, or I use CDs with tones on them. If you're serious, get yourself a tone generator. Alright, so this is unfiltered, and you can see how much output we have here at 7 Hertz by the movement. So what we're going to do now is switch. I strapped a 500 microfarad capacitor here. The guys in the automotive stereo, they call these bass blockers, because capacitors block out low frequencies, and of course they block out DC. Alright, now notice the reduced output. See how we're getting much less movement, we're getting much less energy into this voice coil. Here, I'll switch back to straight and watch how much the coil jumps. You see, that's how much energy we're reducing. Now this is 500 microfarads. I mean, we could do the math, but you can figure this out for yourself. There's calculator, you can get value calculators on the internet, and there's all kinds of software packages for crossover design. But the capacitors filter out bass. Alright, now we're going to go to the inductor, and the inductor filters out highs. So let me change my generator, and we'll get off of 7 Hertz. And alright, generator set on about 1K. Got a certain level of output that you can hear, I guess, on this audio track. Now I'm going to switch it directly. I'm going to bypass this inductor. You see, that's quite a bit of difference in energy. Alright, so what we've just shown you is that capacitors block out bass, inductors roll off the highs. And remember, the voice coil that drives the speaker has inductance also. You need to calculate that into your software when you're trying to figure out an accurate crossover. Alright, since we have one element, it's called first order. We're rolling off bass, we're rolling off highs. First order, one element. That gives you 6 dB per octave roll off and a 90 degrees of phase shift. Now when you combine an inductor and a capacitor, you have two elements. So now we're second order. We double our slope to 12 dB per octave, and we doubled our phase shift to 180 degrees. That's why you see a lot of times on a two-way that they'll flip the polarity on one device to get rid of that 180 phase shift and get it back in line. So if we had three elements, there again we go 18 dB per octave and a 270 degrees phase shift. So you don't see a lot of that. Some guys try to get really fancy. Teal is a speaker I like a lot. They use strictly first order networks. Less phase shift, what's more important to you. You're going to get, with the second order network, you're going to get a 3 dB notch at the crossover point. And remember, at the crossover point, the steeper the slope, you start getting into third, fourth order networks, the more you degrade the transient response at the crossover point. So that's an important consideration too that you don't see a lot of people talking about. Alright, now we'll get back to the AR. Alright, something I didn't mention earlier, but this is a good time to mention it now. I got this one about halfway back together. But I've left this one alone, and the point I want to make here is when you do this kind of stuff, do them one at a time. Because even though you think, oh, this is simple, I can memorize where all this stuff goes, no problem. And you get everything started, taking everything apart, try to put it back together. This way you have an exact quick reference. You can just look in this one and see where everything goes if you get confused or you forget which wire went where. Leave one of them intact until you get the first one done and then test it. Now one other thing I want to show you. Remember I said that this cap, the first time I measured it, the 150 segment checked high. Look, watch my meter here. Watch what this one does. Now you see that's supposed to read 150 microfarads. It reads 371 microfarads, even though it's got a very low ESR. You can see the cap is more than doubled in value, so that's why these old caps got to go. Alright, now we got this one recapped, and as you can see, I'm going to leave the original capacitors in here, and I'm doing that not because anybody would ever use them again, but because this speaker is more about being a collectible speaker than it is about being a great sounding speaker. Now I know the AR people are probably going to hammer me for that one, but as a collector's item, I just don't want to take these caps out and throw them away. I'm just going to leave them in there. So I'm going to put my caps right here and right here, and I'll glue those in place. And here's the new pots. When you put the new pots in, you got to make sure when you get them all done that all your wires are clear of any other wire, because there's other landings down here and other wires that move through here. So the last thing you want to do is make sure that you don't have any of these leads that are making contact where they shouldn't be. Like I said, we'll glue these caps down, and then we'll button the thing up. Alright, all we've got left to do is button these up now. You can see we've got the new caps installed and glued in place. We've got the pots replaced, and we've left the original capacitors in there. We're going to leave them in there because somebody might want them one of these days, who knows. Now, we're going to strip this old putty off. So even though it's still really viable for putty that old, it's surprising. It could actually be reused. It's very viable, very pliable. So you could actually drop the woofer back down in there, but you got to remember that the airtight seal on acoustic suspension is a very important thing. So typical putty knife, but make note, this is plywood. This is not MDF. So it's easy to get that top veneer with the leading edge of your putty knife. So you might want to go sideways with the putty knife like this. There's less chance that you're going to damage this veneer. If you do pull up some of the veneer, like right there, just take some of this original putty and just fill that in a little bit, so that when you put your new putty over it, you make sure you've got a good airtight seal. So you don't have to take it all the way down the wood, you just have to get the majority of this putty off, so the new putty will fill in and make it airtight. An alternative to if you don't have a putty knife, utility knife. But there again, with the utility knife, you want to be even more careful you don't gouge the veneer. You might want to use the dull side of the blade and come around like this. But like I say, you don't have to get all of it off. You don't have to get down to bare wood. Alright, now we're going to put the insulation back in and put some new putty on so we can remount the woofers. Let's look at the woofer, because all the putty doesn't stay on the cabinet. So here we have putty on the woofer, and we're going to remove all that with the putty knife. Put new putty there so we get a good airtight seal. Now there's one other issue about the woofer. You see, when I pulled it out, I put a little mark on it so I know which way it was oriented. In other words, which was the top and the bottom. So there's an issue that's kind of controversial called gravity bias. I know some guys that's been doing speakers a long time, they don't even think that gravity bias is any kind of an issue, even for something that is this old, you know. But you think about it, especially like on this AR woofer, you got a big heavy voice coil, and it's sitting there for years with the gravity pulling down on the voice coil. You could eventually get the form rubbing on the pole piece, or you could get the suspensions to get a bias that are cocked out, so it's not running as linear as it could. So we'll flip it over and put what used to be on top on the bottom. So if you don't believe in gravity bias, then you could say, well, it's certainly not going to hurt anything, and it's been running like this for all these years, so we'll flip the woofer over and give it a chance to run the other direction for a while, and then we'll show you what happens when we get them buttoned. Alright, we've completed the restoration of this pair of AR3As. This pair is approximately 48 years old, so who knows, maybe they'll go for another 48 years. There's not a lot we can do with the original woofer. We've reinstalled it, we flipped it 180 degrees, and maybe that'll help with the gravity bias, if you believe in that. The last thing to do is reattach the grill. Now, we certainly don't want to glue it on hard like they did. If you do use glue, use the very minimal amount where you can get it back off if you need to. You might try Velcro. It'd be pretty hard to use any other kind of fastener on this thin material here, so Velcro or just a little tiny spot of glue. Now we'll listen to it here for a second. This, a few years ago here in Austin, I had a studio where we recorded binaural, and some guys here from Austin, they used to call themselves the Free Brass Cartel. Let's see what they can do for this AR. We'll see you next time, YouTube.